Welcome back to the Astro-Insights podcast. In today's episode, we're taking a closer look at one of the themes raised in episodes 2 and 3, namely the great conjunctions and era-defining grand mutations involving the social planets Jupiter and Saturn, and their connections to what the Renaissance astrologer and physician Marsilio Ficino would term the marriage of faith and reason. This time around, we're shifting our focus to the social and cultural reverberations of the great conjunctions of 1603 and 1623, and their curious connection to the rise of Rosicrucianism, a mysterious and often misunderstood movement that gripped the collective imagination of 16th and 17th century Europe and Britain, attracting the interest and admiration of generations of public intellectuals, including Robert Fludd and Elias Ashmole. Joining me this week to decipher this unusual phenomenon is Tobias Churton, author of The Invisible History of the Rosicrucians, the world's most mysterious secret society. According to Tobias, a curious mind trick has blinded adherents to the Rosicrucian cause since it came to public attention between the great conjunctions of 1603 and 1623. This ruse works because it happened that the Brotherhood of the Rose Cross appeared at precisely the time when modern science was emerging. Yet in many respects, you could argue that the Rosicrucians were polymaths, devoted Protestants and Gnostic mystics, who were also learned men and public intellectuals, interested in everything from natural history to medicine, chemistry, astronomy, and even mechanics. Yet, as Tobias has argued, the scientific aspect of this movement and the humanistic desire for intellectual liberty and freedom from religious persecution and dogma that drove the scientific revolution became obscured over time, distorted by retrospective modern assumptions and Cartesian reductionism. But it is in the astrology, those symbolic planetary alignments of Jupiter and Saturn, whose cycle changes heralded this cultural flashpoint when Rosicrucianism went viral, that the mystery deepens. How is it connected to the pivotal events which unfolded during the 16th and 17th centuries, just as the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions shifted triplicity from water to fire signs at the Grand Mutation in 1603 to 4? And what exactly was going on here? Could it be that the cosmos itself had a hand in shaping the intellectual spirit of the age? As we'll see, the celestial events that took place between 1602 and 1623 suggest something more than coincidence. Rather, they point to what Maggie Hyde has described as the secret mutual connivance between the human mind and the cosmos that would later come into sharp focus during the Heisenberg experiments. So let's take a closer look at this fascinating moment in history when the stars, society, and metaphysical symbolism converged in uncanny, sometimes irrational, even excessive, but ultimately inspiring ways. So, welcome to episode 8 of the Astro Insights podcast. With me today is Tobias Churton, who is a lecturer, a writer, somebody who's extremely knowledgeable on the Western esoteric tradition. So, welcome, Tobias. It's an absolute highlight to have you on the show.
Thank you, Lisa. That's very nice to be here.
So Tobias, I thought perhaps, as I say, because this is an astrology show, we could start with the great conjunctions, and perhaps you can just tell us what happened between 1602 and 1623, as far as the astrology is concerned, and the effects that this had, what it did is in terms of being a catalyst.
The background to the so-called Rosicrucian manifestos was misunderstood for very, very, very many years, and is only in the last 30 years really started to become a bit clearer. But it's a kind of clarity which for many people will be perhaps even more mysterious. Because most people will tend to think of the word Rosicrucian as being a kind of magical doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, the whole thing was based in the science and the emerging scientific understandings and disputes of the late 16th and early 17th century.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, when we talk about a Rosicrucian philosophy, if there ever was such a thing, we're really talking about what reputable scientists held to be the case.
Right.
In that period. We're really talking about in England it was the Elizabethan period, and then going into the Jacobean period, the Stuarts.
Right.
Now Kepler, everybody's heard about because he uh, was the first person to systematically prove that the planets do not travel in circular but in elliptical motions, and
Yes.
that about the sun. And
Mm-hmm.
he has his place in the history of science, but he also has a place in the history of theology and religious history because in 1606, he wrote a book on the birth of Christ, which was
Mm-hmm.
based on some observations he'd made, and he was very concerned that people might come to a baleful conclusion about what he'd observed. He went into the Prague Observatory in December 1603,
Mm-hmm.
and an observatory then was just a room with a window for looking out on the stars because they were not using telescopes.
Right.
So you just looked. You wanted a window that kept your vision skyward, and that was it. You had the human eye was what you had.
Mm-hmm.
And on December 17, 1603, he noticed a very, very close conjunction of the planets Saturn and Jupiter in the constellation of Pisces. And in fact, at the closest point of conjunction, they were only
Mm-hmm.
1 degree. There was only 1 degree of angular separation between them, which, in
Wow.
terms of what you see with the eye, would be like two suns.
Yes.
So it's a very close um, conjunction. But there was historically, in the annals of astronomy, which you can in those days simply put a stroke and say astrology because
Yes.
there's very little
Yes,
difference.
absolutely.
There's no formal difference
No.
anyway. There are different understandings. But anyway, we'll talk about astronomy. Keep it keep
Mm-hmm.
it to Kepler's general worldview. If you had a triple conjunction, means it happened 3 times over a year,
Mm-hmm.
this conjunction, that was regarded as particularly meaningful. And that did happen between 1603 and 1604. And what Kepler knew, was exactly the same triple conjunction phenomenon that happened between May and December 7 BC, which
Yes.
is more or less where he dates the events surrounding the birth of Christ and the Star of Bethlehem.
Absolutely.
Now, Rabbi Isaac Abarbanel had been writing in the 1490s um,
Mm-hmm.
that this particular conjunction was very significant for Israel, and
Mm.
even though it's something that happens every 20 years, though it happens in a different constellation. But
Yes. But this one is different because it's a grand mutation, isn't
yes,
it?
uh, he, Rabbi Isaac referred to a mighty conjunction, which he associated with the birth of prophets, revealers, and even the appearance of the Messiah.
Wow.
And these were some of the ideas that Kepler had in mind when he wrote his book on the year. It's called De Anno Natali Christi, on the year of the birth of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Kepler was very keen that people didn't overinterpret these phenomena, which sort of puts him slightly in our more scientific side. He didn't think it was the job of people who are not expert in mathematics, for example, to
Mm-hmm.
start guessing what this all might mean. But things intensified after the first observation of conjunction, because soon afterwards there was a massing of planets when Mars joined Jupiter and Saturn,
Yes. Yes.
and that the highest intensity of that massing of planets occurred in September 1604
Mm-hmm.
at the edge of Scorpio and Sagittarius.
Right.
And he knew also that there'd been a similar massing of planets in 7 BC, which he speculated may have somehow triggered this notion of the Star of Bethlehem.
Yes, and
Great
sort of
sign.
set the Magi kind of off in search of the baby Jesus.
Yes, yes. And but if that wasn't enough, in September, in October 1604, only the next month,
Mm-hmm.
uh, when Saturn and Jupiter were neared their conjunction in Sagittarius, which is in what was called the fiery trigon,
Mm-hmm.
a supernova exploded,
Wow.
or within uh, in the concept of the time, a new star appeared. Now, new stars do not appear because God made the universe and he made all the stars. Now, if a new star appears, it means God is revealing something.
Yes, so apocalypse, revelation.
Well, yes, yes, but Kepler is very soon embroiled in an argument with another
Hmm.
stargazer called Rosicrucian and others as well, who's immediately jumps on this, and he's starting to talk about the second coming and the apocalypse and all of this.
Yes, and am I right in saying that that's because there was a sort of law, if you like, that there was this expectation that a Protestant Messiah was sort of due to make himself known around about this time.
Yeah, I mean, there were prophecies associated with Paracelsus that the line of Septentrion, Septentrion refers to the
Hmm.
northern stars around Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, and that this lion would have, and
Yes,
it's based on material in Second Ezra's or For Ezra,
yes.
where the lion
Hmm.
takes on the eagle. Now, the eagle was thought to represent the Habsburg dynasty, the Catholic powers.
Oh,
We're still in the early 1600s. We haven't got the 30 Years' War yet, so we're not into armed conflict. So the need for a Protestant superhero divinely ordained is not as acute as it will be at the next conjunction in 1623 when the 30 Years' War has been going on for 5 years.
right.
Now, the yeah, this new star appears in the constellation Serpens or the Serpent, and it was visible by anybody for nearly a year.
Hmm.
So knowledge of it and the wonder of it became uh, caused a kind of widespread unease.
Right.
And Kepler himself conservatively thought, well, it might mean the appearance of a new sect,
Interesting.
or yeah, it might be a new sect, or some great event. But he doesn't like to. He doesn't want to speculate too much about what it is.
Right. So, who were the Rosicrucians and what did they stand for? The legend of the Brotherhood of the Rose Cross emerged from what's become collectively known as the Rosicrucian Manifestos, a trilogy of texts published anonymously in Germany between 1614 and 1617 and widely attributed to the German theologian, writer, and Protestant utopian Johann Valentin Andreae. These three texts detail a mysterious sect or invisible college made up of 9 religious friars or brothers and centered around an elusive founding figure known only as Frater or Brother CR, which most likely stands for Christian Rosenkreuz. So, Brother or Frater CR is described as the last remaining descendant of a German noble family with Gnostic leanings, who is orphaned and brought up by Catholic monks. When he comes of age, he spends his adult years traveling around Arabia, especially the centers of Sufi, Kabbalistic, and Hermetic wisdom, in search of enlightenment. According to the legend, Frater CI died in 1484 at the age of 106. His body was embalmed and interred in a 7-sided tomb inscribed with magical and astrological sigils somewhere in the Languedoc area of France. More than a century later, his tomb, described as a compendium of the universe, is allegedly rediscovered by a band of devotees who find a prophetic inscription carved into the outer wall of the tomb, which reads, "I will be opened in 120 years," at which time the instructions for surviving members of the order were to make Rosicrucianism known to the world. Based upon the year of his death, 1484, 120 years would take us to the year 1604, the very same year as the Grand Mutation and Kepler's supernova. So we can see why the anonymous release of the Rosicrucian Manifesto trilogy in 1614 and to 1617, particularly when combined with apocalyptic interpretations of the cosmic signs of 1602 to 1604, would ignite a fervent response across Europe, sparking debates and discussions and inspiring the formation of societies and fraternities aligned with Rosicrucian ideals, including, some have speculated, Freemasonry. So this is all kind of coming together, and then Kepler writes this book, and I gather that he was a graduate of Tübingen University.
He studied mathematics at Tübingen under Michael Maestlin, and Michael Maestlin was the man who taught mathematics to Johann Valentin Andrei, who is
Ah,
almost certainly the author of the first so-called Rosicrucian Manifesto. I say so-called because it was not intended to be in a manifesto as people imagine them today. It was originally circulated in manuscript from about 1610, but then it was pirated and published and printed in Kassel in 1614, and then an enormous furore began, and hundreds of pamphlets flew across all of Europe, mostly the Protestant Europe, astonished that this secret brotherhood, founded by one Frater C.R., he's never named, who gathered his disciples in the house of the Holy Spirit, having been to the east, where he's welcomed by the sages of Damcar, which is probably a misreading of the Ortelius map for Damar, which is in Arabia, and there's a university there to this day. But that's by the by.
I find this quite fascinating, that there is this link to the Muslim and the Arab world.
Because André is one of his closest friends at Tübingen was Christoph Bezold, who was a professor of Oriental Studies and wrote a book on the sects of the Middle East, published around 1610. And it's really thanks to him, I think, that we have this idea of Frater C.R. leaving his monastery and going to Arabia to contact the elemental beings and the lost truths of science and nature, and to learn it from these Arab sages. And I'm sure he was thinking of groups like the Sabians.
Yes, and of course with Ficino,
and Sufis, I suppose. Sufis, Sabians, Yazidis, for all I know.
Well, absolutely, but also, I mean, Ficino was recovering the Neoplatonic knowledge from the Arab world. He was literally sort of getting texts, Hermetic texts, and translating them from sort of Arabic into Latin. And the same with, was it John of Seville, with Abu Mashar?
It's interesting that the conjunction in September, October of 1604 takes place in Sagittarius, which is what Abu Mashar, the 8th, 9th century astronomer, referred to as the fiery trigon, because he divided the 12 signs of the zodiac into the 4 elements. So Sagittarius, Aries, and Leo were in the fiery trigon. And because it's fiery, it's associated with prophecy and the spirit.
Indeed, yes. This is sort of Aristotelian physics, isn't it?
Well, there's a bit of it. It's more Kabbalah, because the letter Shin is associated with spirit, and it looks like flames. So it's a mixture of Kabbalah and philosophy.
Yes, but it's the lightest element. It's the one that sort of reaches up towards the heavens. Fire was associated with spirit. So it's all these things.
Well, also the fact that Kepler observed that this supernova, and not that he called it a supernova, this new star, had a kind of pinkish rosy color.
Interesting.
So it's even announcing itself with a load of other alchemical links. Now, other things could be added to this, because in 1602, a comet, but it was again widely described as a new star, had appeared in Cygnus. That's the constellation of the Swan, which happens to look, if you look at the constellation of Cygnus, rather like a cross. So it's all adding to those. So this is 1602. So that seems like a precursor. And the new star in Cygnus and the new star in Serpens are joined in the first Rosicrucian so-called official writings associated with the RC Brotherhood.
Interesting.
So Cygnus and Serpens become the key things, and here you have the serpent, and as it were the cross. You've got the connection with Ros. And there is already a huge literature stemming from Paracelsus's religious works, which were beginning at last to be published, because they couldn't publish. Paracelsus, the great doctor, couldn't publish religious works in his lifetime, and they were not published, and many of them circulated in manuscript. Were eagerly. He had a complete vision of a spiritual reformation. So you have a spiritual reformation belief, and but all of it very esoteric. I.e., this is a kind of knowledge-based revelation.
Right.
And the worry of people like Kepler was that in the wrong hands, you're going to end up with lunatics like the Anabaptists of Munster, who are expecting Jesus to appear tomorrow morning,
Right.
and deal with all their enemies and so on.
Yes, yes. And quite understandably, it could, because people can see this for themselves with their naked eye. They can see the supernova and the comet. And naturally, you're going to get sort of, maybe you're going to feel in awe, but you're also going to get excited because you can think, well, what does this portend? And as you say, the symbolism is quite striking, that you've got this rose. I mean, even Mars being associated with the color red. It kind of adds to this. So you've got Mars, and then you've got the cross, so you can see the sort of the symbolism kind of coming together. Yeah. So yes, Kepler. Well, before we get onto that, I'm interested to know, with the constellation of Serpens, this is the constellation that we now call Ophiuchus. I seem to recall that nowadays it's called Ophiuchus. It's the serpent bearer, and then in certain circles was associated with the sleepiest.
Well, there you are, healing and so forth. Yeah. But it's all bound up. Now, what you've got to think is that the universe, when they're gazing out there, for many of the observers, was a kind of great alchemical event going on all the time.
Mhm.
So, as the alchemist projected and made his additions in the crucible and so forth, the universe was projecting energies
Mhm.
to Earth. And the understanding of that comes through Al-Kindi.
Oh, with the ray theory.
Yeah. So the alchemists used to collect ros, which is the Latin for dew,
Yes.
because the dew was regarded as the microcosm of a star projected.
Gosh.
And so you could acquire star quality, and by using this dew as part of your alchemy,
Mhm.
you gained propitious values if it was taken at the right astrological time. So
Ah.
all of this is working together: astronomy, new stars, revelation, projection of spiritual power,
Yes.
and you've got writers very soon that are starting to say these events are not just signaling
Mhm.
a change. They are actually enacting a cosmic fundamental change, something which John Dee had prophesied in his 1564 book,
Hmm.
Monas Hieroglyphica, the one hieroglyph. And it was believed that a golden age associated with a 1,000-year reign of the Holy Spirit before the final wrapping up, because it was widely believed that
Mhm.
before the end of the world and the final judgment, there would be a great revelation of knowledge.
Ah.
So,
Right. So this is all sort of to do with the prophecies of Revelation and the apocalypse in the Christian tradition.
yes,
Yes.
that's
Hmm.
absolutely right.
Yes, but I mean it fits very well with Abu Mashal's idea of these great chronocraters as signaling the beginning of new eras, um, and which is very fitting for the milieu that you're
Yes,
talking about.
yes,
On the 16th of July, 1623, the planets of Jupiter and Saturn formed a great conjunction, this time in the sign of fiery Leo, the second in a series of 200-year conjunctions, all in fire signs, that had begun at the Grand Mutation in Sagittarius witnessed by Kepler in 1603 and 1604, and which many prophets and intellectuals of that period associated with the dawn of a new era. Within this climate of heightened anticipation, anonymous placards began to appear all across the city of Paris, announcing the visible and invisible presence of a mysterious brotherhood, the Rosicrucians, or Brothers of the Rose Cross, a secret society that lived incognito amongst the local population, who were there to offer their wisdom about the true teachings of Christ to those who sought deeper knowledge. The writer Gabriel Naudé described these events as setting off a hurricane of rumor and speculation that blew across France and set people talking. Although their existence remained unverifiable, the public response to the announcement was marked. Some citizens reacted with curiosity, others with concern. For believers, their appearance in alignment with the 1623 conjunction only served to legitimize their claims. Others, however, were more skeptical, even hostile to the idea. And it was into this charged atmosphere of collective excitement and expectation that the Rosicrucian manifestos were published, albeit without permission from their author. Given their hopeful message, together with the apocalyptic prophecies of people like Studian and Kepler that had been doing the rounds since 1604, it is no wonder that the Great Conjunction of 1623, which took place just a few years after the final Rosicrucian Manifesto was published in 1616, became a widely anticipated cosmic event. While Studian's apocalyptic predictions had often been consistently proved wrong, Kepler had modestly suggested that the triple conjunction and supernova of 1604 would herald a significant war, mainly thanks to the presence of Mars, and or the appearance of a new sect, thanks in part to the presence of Jupiter, which of course governs religious beliefs. And in Paris in 1623, at the second great conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn, this time in fiery Leo, it would appear that Kepler's prediction had come true. There was war, all right, the 30 Years' War, a religious conflict that blighted many parts of Central Europe. And there was, as Catholic Parisians thought, a new sect, and the war and the sect appeared to be connected. But going back to 1623 and to Rosicrucianism, back to the story of what happened was the Great Conjunction of 1623 and the fact that what the Rosicrucian movement was because nobody actually knew who was a member of it.
Yeah, well, okay. In December 1623, which is exactly 20 years after Kepler observed the very close conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter from his Prague observatory, in December 1623, we have another conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, this time in the constellation of Leo.
I see.
Now, that's interesting because at that time, there were pamphlets being written by serious men about the Protestant lion who would be expected to lead the Protestant armies to eventual victory over the Antichrist, that is, the forces of the Habsburgs, who had destroyed Bohemia and persecuted the Bohemian Protestants, later known as the Moravian Church.
Right. So this is the Protestant Messiah, a savior.
Yes, he's going to be he's going to be a military leader.
Okay.
And they identified the line with various figures. One was Frederick of the Palatinate, who, especially after he marries James I's daughter, James I was trying to please the Parliament and offer some kind of olive branch to militant Protestants in the House of Commons. So he marries Elizabeth, his daughter, to Frederick of the Palatinate, who's a Protestant leader at Heidelberg.
Right.
And they're married in 1613, just before the first Rosicrucian Manifesto comes out. So that period before the 30 Years' War starts in 1618. The leading up to it is a period of enormous expectation. Something wonderful is going to happen, as it turned out, when Frederick joins forces with other Protestant dukes against the Habsburgs. He's defeated ignominiously, and he has to go into exile with Elizabeth, James I's daughter, and they then become foster parents of a Rosicrucian movement in England under Charles I.
Right.
And Elizabeth the Bohemia herself she becomes a patroness of the new sciences, including Descartes.
Oh, interesting. And so there's constant links between Germany and England, which is sort of cross-pollinating each other.
Yes.
Yes, and so apocalypticism starts to sort of rise again, which we see again during Ashmole and Lily's time too, with the English Civil War and the prophecies around that, which were also linked to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. So it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, and Paul Bembridge, the historian, has basically said that Oliver Cromwell's court was a Rosicrucian court. And certainly Samuel Butler, who's a royalist, pro-royalist writer after the Restoration in 1660, he blames the madness, as he saw it, of the English Republic as being the work of Rosicrucians, alchemists, and lunatics of every kind. And he parodies them in his book Hudibras.
Interesting. But and yet there do seem to be people that were great admirers of Rosicrucianism, such as Robert Fludd and Elias Ashmole, from what I understand.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're a completely different generation, although he does participate in the English Civil War.
Interesting. And William Lilly actually sort of talks about this too. So it was clearly a fascination for people in England, certainly for Ashmole and for Lilly.
Yeah, yeah. They're second generation, second or third generation British Rosicrucians, and the whole thing's gone through a metamorphosis by the time it starts to manifest in England. And they didn't. I mean, Ashmole really didn't know the origins of it. Um, he took. I mean, he himself um, meditated on the farmer and wrote a petition in code, his own code, uh,
Yes, yes.
to petition to be accepted as a member. And this was the sort of idea, was that if you found yourself spiritually in tune with the message of the Rosicrucian material, then they would know through
Right.
some kind of
Through the ether.
through the ether, and you had to identify yourself inwardly with it.
But but just sort of going back to the idea of the Rosicrucian sort of philosophy. So Valentinus had written this farmer, but he didn't actually intend for it to be published. But because I suppose what I'm trying to get at here is that there may be some misconceptions about what Rosicrucianism actually was.
Well, it wasn't anything. This is one of the hardest things to grasp about it. There's no such thing as Rosicrucianism. We use the term to cover all sorts of developments that have some link with. Uh, Usually, if you're going to say, well, what's it all based on? Well, you could say it's based on the publication of the Farmer in 1614, and
Hmm.
then the publication of a document called the Confessio
Yes.
Fraternitatis in 1615, which is a very different kind of document, by the way, to the Farmer. And then in 1616, almost certainly, Andrei publishes, I think, for a purpose to show that he was talking about a ludibrium, a kind of play.
Oh.
He he gets Lazarus Zetzner in Strasbourg to publish the chemical wedding of Christiane Rosenkreuz,
Hmm.
where it would appear that the Frater CR was actually his literary creation, Christian Rosenkreuz, Rose Cross.
Ah.
That's the first time we actually get that Rose Cross as a name, and
Yes.
that's when you get people can start talking about uh, Ordo Rosicrucis. That comes after the revelation, as it were. I don't mean that in a religious sense. But this document, The Farmer, which is
Hmm.
a most wonderful read and extraordinary, and it feels totally genuine. It has a sobriety and a dignity of language that you associate
Hmm.
more with Shakespeare than religious tracts of the period. It's a remarkable work. But what it's suggesting is that Europe is on the cusp of a major uh,
Hmm.
change and a real reformation can occur rather than what the author clearly thought was a fake reformation, that of Luther and Calvin, Zwingli, and the Protestant reformers we've all heard of.
Interesting.
The idea in Andre's mind was that they that wanted the spiritual reformation of the whole church. Paracelsus is certainly one of those people. Caspar Schwenkfeld, the Knight of Ossig, Valentin Weigel. These are all people who reject what they call the Mauerkirche, the Church of Stone, uh, in favor of the spiritual church.
Interesting. And when you say that, what it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that they weren't sort of interested in a kind of a socio-political type of movement where you're literally snatching power and authority from Rome, to sort of the Protestant church, but you're actually talking about a kind of a liberation where individuals can seek a closer relationship with the divine without necessarily having an intermediary like the church.
Yes, it's a small g. It's a Gnostic inspired movement, but the founders of it, first of all, didn't want to found a movement as such anyway. But they would have been quite horrified if you'd said that they were a heretical tradition.
Hmm.
And this is really the Western Gnostic tradition, small g. And when we talk about Western esotericism, the heart of it, the beating heart and soul of it, is this, if you like, Western gnosis.
Yes.
The word is not used. This is very important that the word is not used, nor did they see themselves, Andrei certainly, as followers of any particular school of that period. But we can recognize today that some of their material is coming through Hermetic.
Yes.
Hermetism is part of the Gnosis movement.
Yes, and so it's linked to what I suppose what we would call the perennial philosophy. So do you think that they were inspired by the sort of humanism that blossomed during the Renaissance?
Oh, very much so. Yes, I think for Andrei particularly, who was born in 1586 in Herrenberg, and was a bit of a rebel, and he was sent down from university. And his family practiced alchemy. His father was one of the signatories of the Lutheran Formula of Concord of 1577. He came from a very good family, extremely well educated,
Hmm.
and his great interest was what we call
Hmm.
Renaissance literature.
Right.
And he recognized huge. Scaliger is one of his heroes,
Right.
as is Pico della Mirandola,
Interesting.
which is no surprise.
No.
So, yeah, he regarded what we call the Renaissance. It certainly wasn't known like that at the time at all, but he regarded that 15th century
Hmm.
pre-Lutheran movement as the first blessings of the great spiritual reformation and the freeing of the human mind from superstition and obscurity into a new spiritual liberation.
Interesting.
And for him, he saw how the whole thing had gone wrong when religious power, was
Hmm.
put in the hands of what we call today Caesaropapism, which is the various dukes of the German states, of which there were a great deal, being given control, thanks to
Mm.
Luther, of religion in their territories.
Hmm.
So, on that principle, Henry VIII decided he could rewrite
Yes.
the doctrines of the Church of England
Interesting.
very soon.
Mm.
You know.
Yes.
So for Andrei, this is all a disaster.
Mm.
Now, these astronomical events sort of lit the touch paper
Interesting.
of this building, growing expectation. It's mostly in Germany. There was yet going to be a great revelation, which would fulfill
Mm.
the promise of the Florentine Platonists, Ficino,
Interesting.
Pico,
Yes.
and to some extent Giordano Bruno. Um,
Hmm.
Andrei had contacts with the Venetian Republic, which was fighting the papacy for its freedom at that time,
Interesting.
and he had contacts who'd known Giordano Bruno before he was burnt at the stake.
Gosh.
1600, only 4 years before this so-called new star, he's burnt at the stake in Rome as an impenitent heretic. He'd written that the universe was infinite because only an infinite universe could correspond to an eternal God. And he was a champion of heliocentricity because he saw the
Mm.
spiritual symbolism of that. But
Yes.
he said there were innumerable suns and innumerable worlds, and all supporting spiritual creatures.
Mm.
And the Inquisition saw him as somebody who favoured the Protestant states
Yes.
and had too many of his own ideas and was too free altogether.
Hmm.
And he said that with a knowledge of magic, anyone could do the miracles that Jesus did.
Which is I guess you can imagine heresy with a capital H.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. And I think the thing that listeners really need to understand is that this period, in the late 16th, early 17th century, alchemy and chemistry are bound up with astronomy
Mm.
because
Yes.
everything is based on the four principal elements, which are not the physical elements as we know them of earth, air, fire, and water, but they are modes of being which have correspondences to certain qualities you associate it with earthiness, dryness, or
Yes.
fire, and so forth.
Yes. The humours and the temperaments.
But it's all bound up.
You were talking about nature, and you were talking about these really inspiring ideas about nature, which when I read your book, The Invisible History of the Rosicrucians, made me rethink the early scientists and their motivations. Um, I mean, would you say that it was this sort of reverential approach to nature which was actually sort of driving early scientific ideas and thought? Or would I be wrong in that?
No, I think it's um, how can I say? I mean, to some kinds of religious minds, it's not really worth getting too interested in nature because our participation in it is going to be either regrettably or happily brief. And it is the heavenly destiny of man that counts. To other minds, there is the feeling that nature is a book of revelation, and I think in
Yes.
the Rosicrucian circles, that's this tendency is to regard the book of nature as part of the scheme of revelation. Paracelsus says, you know, we are brought to God through the book of the nature and the book of the Bible and directly by Christ. So these are the three means of arriving at truth. So to them, nature does contain this wonderful notion of Paracelsus of nature being filled with what he calls the divine signatures. The
Yes.
mark of the maker is there, and if through assiduous study which he made, you will find cures for every disease when they're in nature ready for the enlightened mind to discover.
Yes. And
And
so
none of this thing, you don't need to, I haven't said this. The essential work of the Rose Cross Brotherhood, as Andre describes it, is medicine. This is the major
yes.
thing. It is about
Yes.
curing the diseases of the body and of the soul first and the body. And he's got this, of course, through the lovely line that goes from Ficino to Paracelsus and then into the 17th century.
Hmm.
It is you cannot heal the body in physical isolation. The human body
Mm.
participates in the whole of nature going on all around it. And it is how to find the correspondences between the different levels of being, which begin out in the ultimate one of the divine, and are permeated down through the stellar systems, planetary, and so on, zodiacal, down to planet Earth, and they're reflected as above, so below. They're reflected in
Yes.
aspects of nature. And an enlightened person will see the Librum Naturae, the book of nature, as a source of revelation, and can find in Kunrat's time, rather exaggerated view, you know, Christ the stone is present in everything. Uh, and and the Cambridge Platonists, and it is Platonic anyway. It is
Yes. It's sympatheia.
Neoplatonic philosophy. The universe reflects to degrees the mind of God. So if we want to understand nature, we need to understand the mind of God, and if we want to understand the mind of God better, then we need to look at nature.
Yes. And so this is sort of Proclus.
All of this heresy to the mind of Richard Dawkins, you know.
Well, absolutely. This is what I'm trying to get at, is that at this stage, everything is part of one big cosmology. This, the microcosm, the macrocosm, they're connected, and we see this so reflected so well in Robert Fludd's work.
Well,
Mine.
yes, he was attacked by Mersenne. Anyway, they say that this whole macrocosm microcosm theory has been taken to ridiculous extremes, and whereas Paracelsus talks about the little heaven
Hmm.
that is in man, and that is until you link up every organ and every faculty of man with the cosmos, you'll never understand how to cure a person.
Interesting. Yes. So I mean, we've got these threads that are all kind of coming together. The sort of Gnostic thread, the the Hermetic thread, and of course these periods that are marked by the planets through Jupiter and Saturn, which Ficino associated with faith and reason, between science and religion, that are coming together
Well,
in it.
they've never been apart in this period. This is one of the great nonsenses that historians of science have been trying to peddle now for a couple of hundred years. That there's this great divide starts to grow up between religion and science, and it suits historians of science to believe this, but it's not
Mm,
the case any more than it is actually the case now. All I'm trying to say is this idea that religion and science varied. Clearly, there were uh, problems of interpretation, and you get that with Kepler. This becomes
yes.
more extreme when you look at 25 years later, and you've got Marin Mersenne writing against Robert Fludd. You've got,
Mm,
and funnily enough, you've got, and Mersenne's a friend of Descartes. Yeah, Descartes. I mean, you can't say that these were men of science and they made a division between rational thought and the Bible. For many people, the Bible was the most rational account of humanity that was possible. It's only when discoveries like uh, fossilized
yes,
dinosaurs
yes.
and the chronology,
Geology.
and it's when the chronology of the Bible is seriously questioned, that's when you start to get a problem, and that's not happening. Uh, I mean, there'd always been atheists and anti-theists right from ancient Greek times. There'd always been people who thought beliefs in God were just comforting notions,
Yes,
and
yes.
that nature was sufficient of itself to explain itself.
So
Most of
the
the men
big.
we're talking about and were very religious men.
Hmm.
It was a question of but they didn't want to sully their mathematics by supporting fanatical
Yes,
interpretations.
yes.
So, or yeah, and in the same way that you have with alchemy in this period, there is a ritual aspect to that too. So scientific experiment involved prayer.
Really?
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh yes.
But I mean, I really sort of I was so taken with the way that you explained the sort of the thread um, from the Renaissance and people like Ficino, natural magic, through to this period, and then to Robert Fludd and the Royal Society. Because from what I read in your book about Ashmole, the makers of Freemasonry, it sounded as though Bacon and the sort of the founders of the Royal Society also viewed nature as the sort of second temple that needed to be also understood, that that nature wasn't seen as dead and sort of objectified the way that it would become later once you've got this sort of Cartesian split, that was still very much seen as part of the whole, which is what it sounded like Rosicrucianism really encompassed with things like pansophism. Would
Yeah, I
that
mean,
be?
one of the tragedies of the era is because of the Reformation and the outbreaks of religious hysteria. This is one of those occasions where there is no doubt that religion is a very bad thing.
Mhm.
In the wrong hands, it can be the most destructive thing and a real evil for human kind. And we have seen plenty of signs of that in our own time now.
Yes.
And we saw plenty of signs of it in previous ages. That by the end of the 18th century, of course, and indeed early 18th century, people are sick and tired of religious war.
Mm.
And so the tendency in the early scientific meetings was to keep the meetings on a plane, very much in the Freemasonic style, where we discuss facts which can be proven and quantified
Yes.
and demonstrated as experimental facts. And we keep away from matters which are not uh, susceptible to
Superstition.
demonstration.
Right. Right.
Now, it wasn't very often. It wasn't because they didn't care about religious matters at all. It's that they knew that the discussion would break down very quickly and become the mode of discourse would become impossible if you started to allow uh, too much philosophy and too much religion. So you end up with that kind of very English pragmatism
Hmm.
that what not to say.
Right.
But the end result, sadly, over the generations, has been to create a kind of scientific orthodoxy and what has been called
Yes.
scientism.
Absolutely.
But the rationalists who you're getting into Cartesianism,
Yes.
say, no, 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 these are different orders altogether. What the Catholics were trying, what the Catholics were actually trying to do, but didn't realize they were shooting themselves in the foot, was to say the sphere of religious authority is to deal with the spiritual only, and we don't want mathematicians and chemists and physicists and so on interfering with theology. They are looking at the world totally differently, and that's on an inferior level.
Hmm.
We want to, in other words, they were trying to make this a perpetual case for theology being the queen of the sciences, but could also be indifferent to science.
Hmm.
In fact, what they managed to succeed in doing was to create a situation which Immanuel Kant in the next century comes to the simple conclusion that we cannot prove the truths of revelation through rationality,
Hmm.
which is
Yes.
probably a fair point, but it's too easy to go from that to say, well, then we don't even need to try. We can forget about the truths of revelation and just concentrate on what we can rationalize about, because that's really the extent of our compass. And then you get people like William Blake and the Romantics
Hmm.
rebelling against
Yes.
this
Yes.
enclosure of the mind in the ratio.
And Newton's sleep.
Newton's sleep, yes.
Coming up in part 2 of my conversation with Tobias Churton, cosmic consciousness, cultural shifts, and conspiracy theories. Who were the Curiosi, and how did they misinterpret Rosicrucian ideas? Were the Rosicrucians just another name for the Illuminati?
That the conspiracy of the Illuminati starts very, very early. We're talking about 1651.
And what role, if any, did the Royal Society play in this story? What happens when a creation takes on a life of its own, beyond its author's control?
He tried to end it. He wrote several works where he said, "I wish the ridiculous bells of this ludicrous thing would just go up in smoke."
Together, Tobias and I reflect on symbolism, agency, egregores, and the strange way that ideas can sometimes evolve completely independently in the world.
In fact, he did. His invisible church did bear invisible fruit.
Yes, so it took on a life of its own, which I think almost reflects this idea that the symbolism itself has its own agency. We also consider the influence of drama, spectacle, and the value of the creative imagination and cultural trends in shaping society and driving change.
If it kind of gives people some sort of hope, at least let's try and use that energy for a positive purpose. And that's what he's trying to do.
So join us for the conclusion of our wide-ranging and thought-provoking discussion on Rosimania, where the threads of history, hermetic thought, and group psychology come together in unexpected ways. Available soon wherever you get your podcasts.